Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Well, it might not be good morning where you are, but it's morning here. Just got off work, and I figured I'd do this. I'm gonna try to get it done right this time. I've done it, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and fucked it up every time. So here we go again with Take Fucking Something. Okay, if you're looking at the screen and wondering what game we're fixing to play, it ain't one. It's not a game, it's just a background. I got to thinking a couple of weeks ago about how it's somewhere around my anniversary for having the YouTube channel. You know, I missed it like by a month or something. But it's getting really close to the anniversary of my Meaty Bits run through on ARK. So that's what got me thinking about it, because I was rewatching some of my videos. So I knew it was coming up. One of my co-workers pointed out to me that, you know, my YouTube channel was a little older than I thought it was. But anyway, I'm still going to celebrate an anniversary. And I wanted to do something a little different. I'm not going to play a game. Not any game. Because I game on here all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a book. I'm going to tell y'all a story. An audiobook. And I don't have to worry about copyright laws or anything, because I'm the one that wrote it. And I want to share my story with you. And I hope y'all will enjoy it. It's not completely finished. I'll warn you that beforehand. I'm kind of hoping this will inspire me to continue writing in it. It's been an ongoing process for quite some time now. And, well, I need to fucking get on with it, to be honest. You know, and stop procrastinating. You know, maybe writer's block, I don't know. I just need to find the right headspace to continue writing again, and I'm hoping this will help me get it. You know, maybe if I know more people enjoy it, I'll be more inspired to write it. You know, I think it's a good story, but, I mean, I fucking wrote it. So, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. You know, and if you don't like it, you know, I'm sorry. Don't listen. If you do, I'm going to cut it up into like hour to hour and a half long segments. And I'm guessing here, but I should have somewhere around 10 hours done. So it'll be in its own playlist. So, I mean, if you're not here to watch games and watch me play, then you can just go straight to the book playlist and listen to it there. Anyway, I'm going to cut right into it. I'll warn you beforehand, I'm not a professional narrator. The most I've ever talked has been into this fucking microphone. You know, when I'm playing the games. Most of the time I'm having a conversation, and that's me talking and then me listening and then me talking, so I get a break. You know, I read for 3 hours the other night, and my voice sounded like shit at the end of it. You know, and then I found out my desktop audio wasn't turned up, so it was just like a burning fire without the crackling sounds and the bird sounds. It was, and that's not the environment I wanted to tell the story. So I just had to delete all that shit. And so I decided I'm going to cut it up into more manageable sections. More manageable for you guys to listen to. You know, although there's nothing hard about, you know, exiting out and coming back and picking up where you left off. A little easier when it's, you know, broken up. If I stutter or stammer every once in a while, you know, I just ask your forgiveness and understanding, because I don't do this professionally. You know, and it's not like reading fucking Hop on Pop to a baby, because that's over quick. Let's get rolling. Would you like to change tables? The waitress whispered quietly. You've asked me that every day for the past 3 weeks, Melinda replied. My answer is the same as it always is. Doesn't it creep you out? The waitress asked, interrupting her. The way he just sits there glaring at you. He gives me the willies, and he doesn't even look at me. It was hard to sound emphatic while whispering, but she tried hard. He's not glaring at me, Melinda said, patting a young girl's arm reassuringly. I think he's glaring through me. Besides, she added ruefully, what can he do? Kill me? Don't talk like that, the young waitress blurted out, forgetting to whisper. Don't you ever talk like that. It's not funny. The doctors will make you better. You just have to hold on. You sound like you'd rather have him waste all of the effort you've put out. They want me to check myself into the center tomorrow, Melinda said quietly. It's spreading, and the only way to slow it down is constant chemo and radiation therapy. Even with all that, it's simply a matter of time, and not much of that. Oh God, Melinda, the girl wailed. Have you told Bruce and the girls? There has to be something else. Hush now, girl, Melinda said firmly. We don't want to make a scene, do we? No? I thought not. I haven't told anybody yet. I just found out this afternoon, and I've been trying to enjoy my last day as a free woman. Now, be a dear and go get me a piece of pie. The same kind our observant friend over there's eating. Looks to be Dutch apple to me. It's all he ever orders, the waitress said sullenly. Dutch apple pie and coffee. It's just creepy. She gave her best glare to the man as she walked past his booth, going after the pie. He didn't notice. Melinda washed her way to a scowl at the man in the booth across from her and shook her head. Grace was a good girl, a touch flighty perhaps, but she had a good heart. She didn't need to be starting something with that man over nothing. As so often happened in the past 3 weeks, thoughts of him drew her eyes to his. His eyes didn't even twitch as they locked with hers. She could not stop herself from adjusting the scarf that hid her bald head and blushing slightly. But this time, she didn't jerk her eyes away from his. He was a big guy, not huge, but bigger than average, with sandy or maybe dirty blonde hair that fell to his waist. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a black leather duster that he always wore. If it were not for the perpetual frown that wrinkled his brow, she would have thought him attractive. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, about her age, but his eyes were intense. Yes, that's what they were. That's what he was, she decided. Intense. That was the perfect word. It was like a tiger waiting to pounce, or a lover about to kiss. Flip a coin. Would you like to sit down? His deep voice startled her. It was much deeper than she'd expected. It's the chest, he said, as if she'd spoken aloud. The men in my family are all barrel-chested. It drops a voice a couple of octaves, having that much room to bounce around. Now, will you sit? She sat down. Well, plopped is a better description. She was startled to find herself standing in front of him in the first place. She didn't remember walking over. I have Ewing sarcoma, she blurted out. It's a kind of bone cancer. Oh, what a great conversation starter. You're dying. It was not a question. I'm married and I have 2 beautiful girls, was her response to that. Jesus, why was she just blurting things out like that? For that matter, how'd she gotten over here? You're dying, he repeated, and then added, soon. The look on his face and in his eyes hadn't altered one bit. I love them very much, and they love their mommy. Tears were starting to run down her cheeks now. They will come see me every day. The doctor said they could. Every day. They need to come every day, so that they won't forget how much I love them, and I'll miss them. And Bruce, too. He will come. Tears were flowing freely now, and her breath came in gasps between sentences. I know he will. They will. Hush, he said softly, reaching across the table to gently grab both of her hands in one of his. His hands were huge and strong, she noticed when she tried to pull herself free. Be still, he commanded, with a pulsing contraction of the hand that still held hers. He didn't raise his voice or change expression. Everything about him simply expected obedience. She obeyed. She looked from his hands to his eyes, and her breath caught in her throat. His eyes were pulsing between shades of blue, with a regularity of the heartbeat that she could feel in his hand. She could see flames, yes. She was sure there were flames in his pupils. She couldn't look away. He was a demon. He had to be eyes like that. And the way he knew she was dying and soon, the fire in his eyes was going to consume her soul. She slumped back in the seat. She'd never see her family again. Never get to say goodbye. She could feel the heat now. She'd been sick long enough to know when her body temperature was rising quickly. It wasn't painful yet, about 104 to 106 degrees, but sweat was starting to mingle with the tears coursing down her face. She started to sag, sliding further down in the seat. Sit up. That voice, those eyes, commanding. Once again she obeyed. It was automatic. He said it, and she did it, just like a good soldier. Her clothes were soaking wet now, and she could smell the acrid stench of her sick sweat. She couldn't last much longer at this rate. The human body was just not designed to perform very well in an oven. She idly wondered if he intended to eat her when he was done cooking her. I've already had my pie, he said, and she realized the flames had died in his eyes, and her hands were free. May I touch your head? He asked. What? Why? What? She was dazed. Her body temperature returned to normal too quickly, and she shivered. He roasted her alive without a thought, and then asked to touch her head? If he intended to kill her, best get it over with while she could still die sane at least. You're the one in charge here, big boy. Do what you gotta do. He stood up as far as he could without leaving the booth, and reached across the table with both hands. Calloused hands, she noticed, attached to arms that were much bigger than she had originally thought. Once again, it's the chest. God had a good sense of proportion when he made the mold for my family, he said. As close as he was, she could feel his voice as much as she heard it. Every word seemed to vibrate in her bones, and she fully expected to see ripples on the surface of his coffee. Then she noticed he had replied to her thought again. She wasn't talking out loud, was she? No answer. She didn't think so. He gently placed his hands on both sides of her head, palms above her ears, and his fingertips touching each other. Then slowly caressed her scalp from her brow line to the nape of her neck. It was a caress, too. Nothing that gentle could be called anything else, regardless of the fact that he still held the same scowl that had adorned his face since the first day she noticed him. A second time, the same gentle caress. She could feel it tingle in her toenails. Demon or not, she was a married woman, and this couldn't be allowed to continue. She still loved her husband, and was going to tell the stranger all about it, just as soon as he stopped running his fingers through her hair. It had been a long time since anybody'd run their fingers through her hair. Her hair! My hair! She gasped, raising her hands to her head in disbelief, and opening eyes that she didn't remember closing. She grabbed his hands as they passed behind her ears and squeezed hard, making sure he was real. She looked in his eyes again and noticed he was smiling now. And what that smile did to those eyes had her toes curling up in her shoes again. No man should have eyes that intense. It wasn't fair. I'm married, she stammered. And I have kids, she added quickly. To Bruce, he said, with 2 lovely daughters, as I recall. Yes, she confirmed, and we're all very happy. Why in the name of God would he not look away? No, you weren't, came the swift denial. Not for quite some time, I believe. But we will be, was her vehement response. Why is that, you reckon? He inquired with a raised eyebrow. Because, she started, and then it hit her like a sledgehammer. I'm not dying, she whispered, crying again. You're not dying, he agreed, as he bent to gently kiss her forehead. Have a nice life, Melinda, he whispered in her ear as he pulled his hands out of her hair. Dinner's on me, he said as he dropped a 20 on the table and walked away. It was true. She wasn't dying anymore. She had no pain. It had been a part of her life so long she almost missed it. Almost. She was in shock. She knew it, but that didn't make it any easier to fight through. She couldn't think straight or get her body to cooperate, and he was just walking away. She had to stop him. Had to. Wait, she croaked when she finally found her voice. Wait! Louder this time, but the man didn't slow down as he walked out the door. She found her feet shortly after her voice and ran. She could run again. To the door. She didn't even pause when a startled Grace dropped a saucer holding her slice of pie. Why? She bellowed as she looked up and down the street, searching for him. He wasn't there. It's impossible. She wasn't that far behind him, and there were only 6 other people out there. Why me? She hollered at the top of her lungs. He had to be there. Doesn't matter. She heard him quite clearly, but she could not see him anywhere. Yes, she answered. Because I could. His answer came from farther away. He was leaving. That's a shitty answer, she yelled. Her only answer this time was the sound of laughter fading off in the distance. Thank you, she whispered, crying softly now, arms clenching her own chest fiercely, staring down the empty street. He stood watching her stare down the street where he'd asked the wind to carry his voice. She didn't seem to like his answer. They never did. But it was the only one he ever gave, though. He hated dealing with the aftermath of helping someone, answering all the questions. So he avoided them afterwards. Grateful people made him uncomfortable. Hell, for that matter, people in general made him uncomfortable. The people he helped were worse, though. The young lady in front of him was one of the worst yet. To listen to her, you would have thought he'd removed her cancer in hope of some form of carnal recreation. The thought brought his frown back. That was how it worked out, it seemed. He could only get rid of his frown for moments at a time, before the thought of how base human nature was brought it back. Like I'm gonna save your life just so we could go to a hotel and bump uglies, he thought. Or better yet, why don't you leave your husband and kids and run off with me so that I can spend the rest of my life listening to you bitch and whine? He snorted derisively, and the woman's head whipped towards him, searching for the source of the sound. She wouldn't see him. Couldn't see him. He wasn't invisible. Invisibility was hard even for him. Hard and complicated. He constantly had to hop around avoiding people and wind-blown debris. Try convincing a bunch of people that they didn't just see a plastic bag casually floating down the street when there's no wind just because you didn't know it was stuck to your back. Yeah, much too complicated. It was much easier just to convince her that she didn't see him. That was simple as maintaining eye contact and a little push on her visual cortex. It'd wear off in a day or so, but by then, with luck, he'd be gone. He never stayed too long after helping someone. Too many questions from people he had no desire to talk to. There's no room in modern society for someone like him. Nobody really believed in magic anymore. There was no faith. He knew that tomorrow Melinda would go back to her doctor and get tested and retested just to find out she no longer had bone cancer and that all of her organs were perfectly healthy. She already knew it to be true, but wouldn't believe it until they told her. No faith. Then they would start with the questions. She'd tell them about him, and they wouldn't believe her. they'd want to meet this miracle worker. He'd be long gone. Melinda had went back into the diner, so he started his long walk home. Miracle worker. That's what they always called him, with a derisive sneer, as though it was completely inconceivable that someone could cure something the entire medical community couldn't. If he felt like talking to him, he could have corrected him. He was no miracle healer. He simply hated disease. It made him madder than hell every time he saw someone like Melinda, ravaged by a disease through no fault of hers, and about to die from it. Cancer was one of the easiest for him to take care of, the easiest to see. It was greedy. It was voracious, not content to destroy only one part of the body. Curing it was just a matter of finding the disease cells and removing them. After that, all he had to do was copy the healthy cells in the infected areas to restore healthy function. Not much different from what doctors did. His method was simply more effective. His house was across the road from the elementary school. He always bought houses by schools. Watching little children always made him feel better about the human race. He loved kids. Their purity and innocence gave him hope, and their exuberance and love for life always lifted his spirits. Schools were also the best place to locate another disease, the human kind, the worst kind. He'd cut that disease out of every town he'd ever lived in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anvil," cried a little girl from the yard next door to him. "Mama said to tell you those men came by again today." "Good afternoon to you too, little Miss Preston," he said, smiling as she approached the fence between their yards. "And thank you. Tell your mama I said thank you very much." He reached across the fence and yanked on the little girl's ponytail. "You remember what's under a pony's tail, don't you?" he asked. "A horse's butt," she answered with a big grin. "You're such a good influence on her," said another woman as she approached the fence. "Amy, you need to go get ready for supper. We're having chili, and there's plenty, if you'd like to join us, Anvil," she added, pushing her daughter toward the door. "Thank you, Sharon, but I just finished eating," he said. "Dessert, then," she persisted. "I made pie. Dutch apple." Okay, he said, laughing. "I'll be over in a bit. I have something I have to take care of first." "I'll just take that as a promise," Sharon said with a grin. "I'll expect you in no more than an hour." She walked away without waiting for a reply. "Just another reason not to stay too long in one place," Anvil said to himself as he entered his house. "People get to know you and exploit your weaknesses." He'd been here a year or so, considerably longer than he'd stayed anywhere else in recent memory. Amy had met him at his gate, his first day there, with the announcement that it was her 8th birthday. For Anvil, it was love at first sight. She'd been delighted when he changed a dandelion into a rose and handed it to her. "Then happy birthday, little one," he said, as she ran off yelling to her mom that she had a magic flower. Sharon had, of course, come over to him to return the flower and apologize for her daughter. "Unless you're a sicko, I doubt you bought a rose for an 8-year-old girl you've never met," she said, handing the flower back to him. Her eyes bulged out when it changed back into a dandelion as soon as he touched it. "Please, let her keep it," he said, handing it back to her, a rose again. "I meant nothing by it, really. Roses are just easier to make than toys." He had left her standing there gaping after him. But that was over a year ago, with many evasive answers and more politely refused dinner invitations in front of it. As was common everywhere nowadays, Sharon was a single mother who'd made mistakes but had had the courage to live with them. Amy's father was a worthless shit maggot who'd left town as soon as he found out Sharon was in the family way. Anvil had promised himself to find him later and talk about responsibility. Talk hard. Thoughts of the deadbeat bastard brought the frown lines back to the young man's brow, and the smile on his lips was not friendly at all. He didn't bother to change his expression as he descended the stairs to his basement. He had to take care of this tonight. He had to leave soon. The rancid smell of fear and urine made him want to gag, but one glance at the 5 naked men tied up, hanging from his floor joists, brought enough fury to squelch his nausea. "I have good news," he told them as he sat in a chair facing them. They didn't look like they believed him, thrashing and squirming around. "Your captivity is going to end tonight." All 5 froze, staring at him. 2 of them were stupid enough to look hopeful. "You see," he continued, "I have to leave town, and I can't take you with me." He sounded disappointed. "So," he said, "seems I have to finish this." He waved his hands and the 5 men fell to the floor. "For your crimes against the children of this town, I sentence you to an eternity in hell, without the reprieve of death. Sentence to be carried out immediately." The men started thrashing about wildly. "I've already spoken to them, and they're expecting you." He placed a hand on the floor and closed his eyes. The naked men started sinking down, still futilely struggling and trying to escape. He stood up and watched them descend. They were all wild-eyed, and a couple had vomited around their gags and were choking on what didn't spew out. They were the worst kind of disease. Harder to find, but much more satisfying to eradicate. "I think I'm ready for some pie now," he said as he looked around his now empty basement. "After a quick shower, that is," he added as he climbed the steps. He'd found the first of his captives a week after he'd moved in. A middle-aged man who'd been carrying the unconscious body of a 10-year-old into the woods at the park. The man had attempted to convince him that the boy was his son. His story changed when Anvil woke the boy up. He punched the older man in his lion-ass mouth and told the boy to run home. That was a year ago. He'd not let them die. I mean, everybody's got to have a hobby. There were a lot of reasons he shouldn't go next door to have pie. But Sharon was his friend. And Amy was... well, she was Amy. And he seldom passed up the chance to spend time with her. The biggest reason he shouldn't go was the fact that he'd be leaving soon. He had no idea how to break it to the little girl, but he'd have to figure something out. Never paid to stay in one place this long. Long enough to get attached. Long enough for people to get attached to him. He should have left months ago, but he was sick of leaving all the time. He had hoped that he'd be able to settle down here, in this small town located at the crossroads of no and where. But he wasn't that lucky. People were his problem. Most people, anyway. He didn't like them as a rule. He did make the occasional exception, like Sharon. But the general population disgusted him. It seemed to him that recently all of the negative aspects of human nature had risen to the top and was being accepted as normal behavior. It was nothing to watch the news and hear about the rape of an old lady or a man being shot for $24.74. Children were abducted, beaten, and molested. Drugs were as much a part of everyday life as single-parent households. It was also common now that few even remarked on it. Sad. That's what it was. He tried helping, tried to change things. He couldn't do a whole lot without risking discovery, but he did what he could. He found missing children, brought hard justice to those who harmed them. There'd been a few others like Melinda, and he'd emptied quite a few children's treatment centers. It was never enough. Mankind seemed hell-bent on destroying itself, and he couldn't escape it, no matter where he moved. If he didn't go, and soon, he would end up going crazy. And that wasn't a safe thought. Those were issues to deal with another day, though. Tonight, he'd have pie with his neighbor, and tomorrow, well, he'd worry about it later. He grabbed his duster and headed over to Sharon's. "You know you don't have to knock," Sharon hollered from her kitchen table. "Not that I expect that to change anything." "Well, then you won't be disappointed," he said, smiling as he entered her home. "It's only polite. Besides, I even knock at my mom's door." "I'm not your mother," she said as he approached the table. You don't say, he said, sitting in the chair beside Amy. I guess that means you're not my sister after all, little one. You're too old to be my brother, silly, Amy replied. You're older than my mama. Not by much, Dumpling, not by much, he said. Now, I am certain that I remember hearing somebody say something about pie. You're early, Sharon said. It's still in the oven. I said an hour. Oh, I'm sorry, Anvil said, starting to stand up. I'll come back later. Sit back down, Sharon demanded with a frown. Why must you be such a jerk? I'll get her some coffee. Why is she always so mean to me? He asked Amy, looking sad. It's because she loves you a lot, Amy answered solemnly. Amy Jo, Sharon exclaimed. Don't talk about things you don't know anything about. Go take your bath, or you won't get any pie before bed. Amy gave Anvil a look that said, see what I mean? And went to take her bath. I don't know where she gets her ideas from, Sharon said, setting the coffee on the table in front of him. It's too much time watching TV, is what it is. Filling her head with all kinds of nonsense. She was looking everywhere but at him. Doubtless, he agreed. Definitely time to leave. She told me earlier that the men come back today. Yeah, she said. I don't know what they expect. I'm doing the best I can. She angrily wiped a tear off of her cheek. Now they're saying that this isn't a healthy environment for Amy because I work too much and she spends too much time in daycare with the sitter. What the hell? I work extra hours so that I can afford the daycare. And don't say it. I already told you I don't want your money. You say it's no problem, but I've seen the calluses on your hands. Rich people don't have calluses. Easy there, sweet meat, he said. Calm down. I think I know how to straighten all this out for you. You're not talking about doing something permanent to them, are you? They'll just send others, she said. No, nothing like that, he said softly. He hadn't wanted to break it to her this way, but now he had no choice. I want to give you my house, he said, watching her uneasily. You want to give me... She trailed off, looking at him apprehensively, understanding slow to creep in. I have to, he started. Eat some pie, she interrupted, walking quickly to the oven. It's bound to be done now, and it's best when hot. Drink your coffee while I get some plates. Amy should be just about done with her bath. He watched her bustle around the kitchen sadly. She knew what was coming. She didn't want to hear it. As if it wouldn't happen if he never said it. He walked over and took the 3 plates out of her hands and set them on the table. I really do have to leave, he said softly, cupping her chin in his hand and raising her head till she met his eyes. Why? She croaked, wiping away her tears with a paper towel. It's complicated, he answered. People are going to start looking for me, and I can't be found. What about Amy? She loves you, you know. She's never had a father, and I was just kidding earlier about you being a bad influence on her. You're great with her. I know you love her. You know, she still has that rose you gave her, and it still looks and smells fresh. You never did tell me how you did that. This is going to break her heart. You know that, don't you? She really loves you a lot. He put his finger to her lips to make her stop. He knew this would be hard. But he had to be harder. Had to. Our pie is getting cold, he said. When? She asked when he sat back down. A week? 2 at most, he answered. I've already done all the paperwork for the house. We only have to have you sign it and get it notarized. A week till what? Amy asked, bouncing in with a towel on her head. A week until you stop asking questions all of the time, Sharon said, wiping her face off and giving Anvil a look that told him to keep his big mouth shut. Sit down and eat your pie. How am I supposed to learn stuff if I don't ask questions? Amy asked around a mouthful of pie. Smart girls ask a lot of questions, don't they, Anvil? Why is Mama crying? Yes they do, sweetie, he said. And you are a very smart girl. Sometimes you won't like what you learn, honey, Sharon told her, wiping her face off again. He was unaware his mind had wandered until he felt two little hands on his cheeks. He allowed his head to be pulled to the right until he was staring in Amy's eyes. You know what will make you feel better? She asked solemnly, releasing his left cheek and rubbing the frown off of his forehead. And what would that be, my young Dr. Preston? He asked with a small smile. Well, first thing you have to do is come in here, she said, grabbing both his pinky fingers and towing him into the small living room. And then you have to sit down, she added, trying to push him down into the couch. And then, she said as she climbed into his lap, you have to tell me a story. Is that what I have to do? He asked, laughing as he hugged her to him. What if I don't know any more stories? Please, she said as sarcastically as a 9-year-old could. You know all the stories. You know you haven't told me all of them. Not all. She sounded certain, but her eyes looked not so sure. He had told her a lot of stories. And what kind of story would you like to hear tonight? He asked, caving into those hopeful eyes. Since I don't really exist anymore, Sharon began, setting his fresh cup of coffee on the table. I know neither of you are going to miss me while I shower. She flipped her hair over her shoulder, stuck her nose in the air, and glided out of the living room with one hand on her hip. Please, Amy said again, rolling her eyes at Anvil. He rolled his eyes at her too, and they both started giggling. Sharon's head whipped around the door frame, and they both stopped immediately and did their best to look innocent. Did you forget something? He asked her. You too. She growled at them, pointing an accusing finger at them. Watch it, she warned, and then stomped off. They didn't start laughing again until they heard her slam the bathroom door. A scary story, Amy answered him, snuggling into the crook in his right arm and putting her head on his shoulder. You're not very soft, you know, she said, poking his shoulder with her little fingers and frowning. I know, he said, smoothing the frown off of her face as she'd done his earlier. A scary story, huh? She nodded emphatically when she heaved his big hand off of her face. Did I ever tell you the one about Lilith? He asked, and then continued after she shook her head no. Well, Lilith was a little girl about your age over in Ireland, and she was blind. One day when she was playing in the yard while her mama hung clothes up to dry, she wandered off. He told her how scared Lilith had been when she realized she was lost, then told her about how she'd been taken by the monsters who worshiped the devil and wanted to kill her and eat her. Then, at the very last minute, when they completed their evil ceremony was about to stab the dagger into her little heart, a stranger showed up and killed all of the monsters and took her back to her mommy. Why did you wait so long to save her? Amy asked sleepily, squirming to get more comfortable in his lap. Because it took a long time to find her, darling, he answered absently. They didn't have a sign up saying human sacrifices to be held at Farron Glen at 2 a.m. on Wednesday the 12th. He was caught up in the memory and not paying attention at all. Besides that, he continued, it had to be really sneaky. I couldn't let them know I was coming. They're still smart enough to run from me over there. They would have killed her if they'd known I was looking for her. Killed her and then ran away. How did you kill all those monsters? Amy asked around a yawn. I'll bet you threw lightning at them and blew them up. Lightning is flashy, but it's not really effective. But fire is much more effective, and it hurts worse. And for what they did to Little Lil, they deserve. He was really caught up in the memory. I think it's time for Amy to go to bed now, Sharon interrupted loudly. She has school tomorrow. The interruption snapped Anvil's mind back to the present, and he quickly replayed his last statement in his head. Shit. Him and his big-ass mouth. He knew he should have stayed home. He darted a look at Sharon. She was standing in the entrance to the hallway with her arms crossed beneath her breasts. He could tell nothing from the look on her face. Maybe she hadn't heard. He looked down at Amy and saw that she was wearing a satisfied smile. I knew you were a hero, she said as she stretched up to kiss him on the nose. Now carry me to bed. Hero, he snorted as he rose to comply with her demand. Silly girl, it's just a story. Another quick glance at Sharon showed that although she had stepped aside, she was still staring at him. The look on Amy's face told him to keep on telling himself that if it made him feel better. Yep, should have stayed home. Will you sing me to sleep? She asked as he gently laid her down and covered her up. I'm afraid my voice is all wore out after that story, he lied. He knew he couldn't sing well and was always self-conscious about doing it solo. But I will play you something, he added in response to her disappointed frown. She beamed a smile at him and snuggled deeper into the bed as he grabbed the wooden flute that he'd made for her off of her dresser. He sat on the floor by her bed and closed his eyes and started to play. The soft, melancholy tune once more took his mind back to Ireland, where he'd learned the tune. He played it through twice, just to make sure she had enough time to fall asleep, before putting the flute back and starting to sneak out of the room. I love you, Mr. Anvil, she muttered sleepily. I love you too, Miss Preston, he whispered back as he slid the door shut. You have no idea how many times I've closed my eyes and pretended that you were saying those words to me, Sharon said softly from down the hall. She was standing in the doorway to her bedroom, still clad in her bathrobe, with her hair in a towel. I thought that if I tried hard enough and waited long enough, the night would come. The only light in the room was behind her, so he couldn't see her face. Now I see how foolish I was to believe that. Sharon, he started, walking towards her until she held up her hand, stopping him. Please, she said, let me finish. I know you'll leave soon, but tonight, she raised her hands up to the neck of the bathrobe and slid it off her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. Stay with me, please. It was close enough to see her face now, to see that she'd been crying. She was staring at the floor between her feet. I know I'm not much, but all that there is of me is yours. You're a lovely woman, Sharon, he said softly, as he tenderly brushed the tears off of her cheek with the back of his hand, trailing his fingers down her neck and onto her shoulder. And I've never met a kinder or gentler soul. He cupped her chin in his palm and raised her head until their eyes met. I can't be here when Amy wakes up. He leaned forward and kissed her. Then let's not stand here wasting time, she said after turning him loose. They're all true, aren't they? She asked as she traced the scars on his chest with her fingers. The stories you told Amy, they're all true. Most, he admitted. It was almost dawn. Gray time, he called it. You should have slept, he added. You have to go to work in a few hours. Well, you know how I feel about wasting time, she told him with a malicious grin. I was not about to waste time sleeping. You do need to get some sleep, he told her, idly running his finger from her armpit to her knee, grinning every time she squirmed like a worm. And I need to get home before the little one wakes up. Buzz killer, she accused, slapping him on the shoulder as he sat up to get dressed. I may call in today. I would really hate to spoil such a fine morning with work. Then by all means stay home, he said quietly as he brushed the hair out of her face, watching her eyelids flutter towards sleep. He bent over and lightly kissed her forehead. Sleep well, he whispered, then crept out the door. I love you, Mr. Anvil, he heard her say as the door clicked shut. Should have stayed home, he said to himself as he walked across his porch. It would have made things much easier. Now it was a bigger mess. He should have gone home after putting Amy to bed. But Sharon had laid all of her cards on the table, and he wasn't such a bastard that he would shame her by walking away. He stripped again and got in his shower, hanging his head and letting the hot water steam away his guilt. The steam coalesced behind him into a vaguely feminine shape. I told you stayed too long. There was pity in the voice. Shut up, Is. Just shut up. God, what a mess.